Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to make this my maiden presentation in this honorable House in support of the budget presented by the Minister of Public Works, Honorable Oneidge, under the theme Plan for Prosperity. This emergency budget, prepared in record time, in extremely unusual circumstances, is the product of a lot of hard work on the part of not only the honorable member, but also a large number of technocrats across the public service. Mr. Speaker, before commencing the business of this debate proper, I would like to add my voice to those expressing sympathies to the families of Joel and Isaiah Henry and Harris Singh. As a citizen, as a mother, my heart bleeds, and the entire nation has been thrown into pain. This pain, Mr. Speaker, is not a partisan pain. An attempt to make this grief and pain a divisive and partisan issue has been shameful, may I say downright disgraceful. We grieve deeply as a nation with and for the families of these young men. My prayer is that the families in our collective communities can find the will, courage, and strength to heal. Mr. Speaker, despite my profound sadness at what has taken place outside of this honorable House, it would be remiss of me to omit expressing that I'm truly honored to join all members of this honorable House for the 12th Parliament of our House. I express my thanks to His Excellency Dr. Irfan Ali for extending to me the privilege and opportunity to serve the people of Guyana in his administration. I also extend thanks to those honorable members on the other side of the House who've afforded me the opportunity to serve in the public service, exposing me to the administrative machinery of government, which experience I intend to draw upon in the service to the people of our country. Last but not least, Mr. Speaker, I congratulate you on your election to preside over this honorable House, and you have my sincerest wishes for a successful, productive, and fulfilling tenure. Mr. Speaker, over $2 billion in current and capital expenditure has been programmed for the portfolio of Tourism, Industry and Commerce and the predecessor Ministry of Business. But before I get into the substance of my presentation, I wish to take this opportunity to speak to some assertions made by some honorable members on the other side of the House. Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, I am disappointed and somewhat dismayed by the quality of the debate coming from the other side of this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, we have presented costed programs and detailed the results that we expect to see from the results allocated. In return, we basically have rabble-rousing and superficial slogans, some of which warrant no repeating, and suggest an inability or perhaps a refusal to intelligently consider the issues and make constructive contributions to this debate. The assertion, however, that this is a private sector budget and not a people's budget is particularly troubling because it indicates a lack of understanding of extremely basic economic principles. Mr. Speaker, what is the private sector without people? When the private sector thrives, the people thrive. The private sector employs people. The private sector pays taxes with which we fund the essential services for people. The private sector brings in foreign currency. The private sector is one of the most important components in alleviating poverty. Economic development is unthinkable without the growth of the private sector. And the view that the private sector only comprises big companies is seriously flawed. The private sector comprises hundreds, if not thousands, of small and micro enterprises some owned and operated by small families and even single parents that provide the livelihoods for thousands of citizens of this country. Mr. Speaker, one other point I wish to bring to the attention of this honorable House is the mischievous rhetoric raised by the honorable members from the other side that this budget is discriminatory. I say mischievous because in the context of the realities of Guyana, those words take on a particular meaning. Who or what group of people are being discriminated against? Which budgetary allocation is hiding under the guise of equality and fairness? Can the allocation of $4.5 billion to provide for 25,000 for every household be called discriminatory? Is the allocation of $150 million to support frontline workers, regardless of their political persuasion, sex, or race, be considered discriminatory? Certainly not the bonus of 2 weeks tax-free salary to the joint services, which I might need to point out includes the Army, Police Force, Firemen, and Prison Service. All of them. Is discrimination the removal of VAT from electricity and water to bring immediate relief to every household and to businesses? Or is it the measures included to assist school children and our senior citizens? Mr. Speaker, these are only just a few examples of how this budget has reached out to improve the lives of every Guyanese. And the hue and cry of discrimination is completely without basis and, frankly speaking, malicious. Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Tourism, Industry and Commerce, facilitating and fostering the development of the private sector, the very engine of growth is now my remit. In furtherance of this goal, in order for us to understand the course that we're taking and the enormity of the task before us, we cannot avoid taking stock and making an assessment of the position from which we start. Mr. Speaker, it matters not which side of this honorable House we sit on. It cannot be denied that our country was in a period of great turmoil and uncertainty for a period approaching 2 years. It is the nature of politics that there will be competing narratives for generations as to why this was so. But again, sir, it is undeniable that this was a period of great uncertainty. And we must understand that uncertainty is one of the worst things that can confront business and commerce. In times of uncertainty, investment is curtailed, production is reduced, employment is affected, consumption is reduced. Less revenues accrue to government to provide essential services, all leading to a vicious cycle of economic dysfunction that hurts predominantly the most vulnerable among us. Mr. Speaker, as is well known, the political uncertainty of 2019 and early 2020 transitioned into a full-blown crisis in the aftermath of the general elections, which was intensified by the globally unprecedented occurrence of the COVID-19 pandemic, the likes of which has not been seen by the entire world in a century, and for which currently there is no reliable estimate of when it's likely to recede. Added to this, the tragic events in West Berbice threaten to further upset our social order. These events have had a devastating effect on business and commerce. Mr. Speaker, this is a situation in which we find ourselves today. These are the circumstances in which the private sector finds itself, and it should be no surprise to any of us that that engine has stalled. Mr. Speaker, we are told that while Guyana's economy overall is expected to grow by up to 33% this year, we are further told that the non-petroleum economy GDP is expected to contract by up to 5%. And it is this non-petroleum economy which accounts for the employment, the livelihoods, and the prospects of the majority, thousands of Guyanese citizens, including, once again, the most vulnerable amongst us. As Ministry of Tourism, Industry and Commerce, it gives me no pleasure to report that over 62% of hotels, guest houses, resorts, places of entertainment and leisure are either closed or are now providing drastically scaled down service. Many small businesses as a result of measures adopted to contain COVID-19, have downsized in response to the pandemic. They have now been forced to reduce overheads in order to stay afloat. Even optimistic economic forecasts warn that some businesses will not survive. But, Mr. Speaker, I am heartened to announce that there is hope and that there is a plan. Budget 2020. This budget, as presented by the Honorable Minister Oneidge, provides for the immediate and the future, for relief and recovery. It is a budget with vision, progressive, and dynamic. Budget 2020 is also designed to provide the foundation for inclusive growth and benefits such that every Guyanese will feel that they have a fair shot, an equal chance at accessing resources and programs offered by this government. Such inclusiveness is one of the ways in which we will contribute to mending the fabric of our society. It is in this context, Mr. Speaker, that I turn to the initiatives that we plan to execute for the remainder of budget year 2020. Mr. Speaker, even in the midst of profound challenges, there are opportunities if we choose to look for them. The COVID pandemic, even with all of its ravages, offers some opportunities for us to exploit as a nation. First, Mr. Speaker, in government, in the public sector, we are forced by the pandemic to do what we've always known was possible. We made greater use of technology to facilitate working from home. We reduced cash handling by encouraging suppliers and customers to conduct business via electronic banking. And most critically, we started moving some services online, actually increasing the efficiency with which we serve businesses in some cases. We are resolved to build on these success stories and to ensure that as we emerge from the pandemic, such efficiency becomes part of the new normal. In pursuit of this increased efficiency with which the government facilitates the private sector, we have therefore resolved to continue the work of implementing the single window automated processing system, for which almost 35 million was spent between January and July 2020, and for which an additional 10 million has been allocated to see us through to December. We see the single window as critical to facilitating international competitiveness of our local companies, allowing them to be more agile and responsive to their local and international customers by reducing the time and cost of complying with regulatory procedures. Mr. Speaker, the nature of these proceedings are such that it is incumbent upon me to remind this Honorable House that this project was birthed out of the National Competitiveness Strategy that was initiated by the PPPC administration as far back as 2009. Another area in which the COVID pandemic may provide opportunities in the midst of the challenges is in the area of tourism. As we plan on safely and responsibly managing the reopening of the sector for the foreseeable future, there will be a larger market for local tourism, as persons who would have previously opted for international travel for leisure look inwards to our local tourism products. We want to ensure as we exit the pandemic, whenever that is, that we would have built our local tourism infrastructure, especially our niche ecotourism infrastructure, to such a level that we preserve this local market and that Guyana will be the first choice for Guyanese. Even with respect to our international clientele in the tourism sector, opportunities still exist because the small, intimate nature of our tourism offering is more amenable to the viability in the face of COVID compliant requirements. While the mass-based tourist product will be difficult to sustain in the face of the need for reduced sizes of gathering and social distancing, the tourist experiences of our typical eco-lodges with small gatherings are more likely to be viable. We have therefore, Mr. Speaker, started a dialogue with the regional tourism associations and started to fashion a package of assistance for investments in upgrading facilities to be able to comply with COVID-19 protocols. This initiative applies especially to community-based tourism facilities and will see the implementation of the National Health and Sanitation Protocol and raising of awareness in communities support the efforts of the National COVID-19 Task Force and will enable communities to be better prepared to accept visitors when travel reopens. Implementation of this program will continue through to December 2020. In this regard, a sum of $21.8 million has been allocated to assist with the training, the acquisition of sanitation supplies, and the acquisition of safety supplies, including personal protective equipment. Apart from our unique small ecotourism product, government has realized that like many other areas, the oil and gas industry has already started to drive increased demand for certain services. The hospitality industry is one of the primary sectors to see such growth. And as such, we are preparing for the increased demand by setting out to attract investments transparently made in large-scale branded hotel facilities for which we will insist on meaningful local participation. As part of a holistic approach, we are actively pursuing the establishment of the Hospitality Institute, which will serve to prepare our people for sustainable employment in the industry. Mr. Speaker, on the theme of relief and recovery, the Small Business Development Fund is going to be a key instrument in our pandemic response. It will be a mechanism by which much needed resources are going to be channeled to small, medium, and micro enterprises, especially those which demonstrate a commitment to preserving employment. We have programmed $100 million for the fund, through which we will disperse small business relief grants for qualifying businesses. These businesses will be required thereafter to qualify for continuing relief to demonstrate that they are meeting the key objectives, among which are preservation of employment and minimizing the price impact to customers. Still on the subject of the fund, Mr. Speaker, under the previous administration, the ceiling in small business grants was reduced from $500,000 down to $200,000. We will raise the ceiling once again to a level where it is likely to make an impact on the hundreds of small and micro enterprises and the persons that they employ and serve. Of course, in order to access these benefits for the employees and owners, our local firms will need to register with the Small Business Bureau. Mr. Speaker, the Small Business Bureau plans to register 1,500 new small businesses in 2020, but unfortunately, in this period of instability and uncertainty, they were unable to reach a fraction of this target in 2020. We are determined to maximize registration of small businesses by publicizing the benefits of registration with the Bureau. These benefits include access to resources of the Small Business Fund and access to procurement opportunities. To see the potential impact of this initiative, Mr. Speaker, the 500 plus small businesses registered with the Bureau employ on average 2 persons each. According to the 2012 census, the average household size was 3.6 persons. Were we to reach a target of registering on the order of 1,500 small businesses, we can see that the Small Business Bureau has the potential to positively impact the lives of up to almost 11,000 Guyanese. We are therefore resolved to redouble efforts to have the small businesses take advantage of the considerable resources that we have prepared to make available directly to them through the Small Business Fund, with which we deliver much needed relief almost directly to households. Mr. Speaker, other key initiatives that offer direct support to industry will include the completion of business support and incubation facilities, including industrial estate facilities at Lethem, Leguan, Emmore, and Belvedere, for which $17 million was spent between January and July, and for which some $92.7 million is programmed for the rest of 2020. These facilities have been languishing unused We are advised that this is a large measure due to severe deficiencies in project management. We plan to make these facilities fit for purpose and to aggressively pursue plans to ensure take-up and utilization by the intended beneficiaries. The funds allocated to these important facilities are part of a $2.2 million which has been allocated to the Small Business Bureau, a tangible expression of government's commitment to the small business sector. Small businesses are part of the private sector too. Finally, Mr. Speaker, before moving off of the small business sector, I remind this Honorable House that the estimates also contain an allocation of $105 million to the Sustainable Livelihoods and Entrepreneurial Development Program. In total, Mr. Speaker, the allocations for medium, small, and micro enterprises exceeds $400 million, with more than half of that allocated program for direct assistance to beneficiaries. That, Mr. Speaker, is a people's budget. Mr. Speaker, I turn from some of the direct support initiatives to those that are aimed at strengthening the institutional environment within which our companies operate. Mr. Speaker, these are the strategic investments that will deliver benefits over a longer period of time than a budget year or an electoral cycle, and they demand foresight and patience to see them through. As a small country with a small economy, it is fundamental for our economic growth that our local companies are able to tap into international markets. In order to do this, they must be able to conform to minimum standards of quality in order to even have a chance of competing in those markets. We are therefore committed to continuing the work of developing the national quality infrastructure, which we consider to be critical to the development of the international competitiveness of our local companies. To this end, therefore, an allocation of $85.7 million has been made for this essential component of our competitiveness strategy, adding to the $92.5 million that has been spent between January and July. Again, another tangible example of our commitment to sustainable national development. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to our legislative agenda. A key part of strengthening the institutional environment is the enactment of legislation which will enable modern 21st century business practice. We are therefore committed to restarting several initiatives which were totally stalled. These include e-commerce legislation, the Movable Property Security Bill, and the continuation of the Secure Transaction Framework project, inclusive of a modern secure transaction law and collateral registries, which will allow for businesses, particularly small and medium enterprises, to leverage their assets into capital for investments and growth. As part of our program for consumer protection, we also intend to bring to this Honorable House legislation to govern the practice of hire purchase arrangements. Mr. Speaker, the private sector represents one side, the supply side, if you will, of the equation. The other side, the demand side, is the consumer. Being sensitive to the needs of the consumer, government continues to commit funding to consumer protection bodies such as the Competition Commission and the Guyana National Bureau of Standards, as both entities have important regulatory mandates as it relates to consumer welfare and protection. Mr. Speaker, for consumer protection, some $83 million was spent between January and July, and some $45 million is allocated for the remaining period, August to December 2020. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, I commend this budget 2020 to this Honorable House, and I maintain that the measures contained therein cogently demonstrate that we are committed to inclusive and sustainable growth and development. That is the creation of security and prosperity for all Guyanese. Criticisms notwithstanding, that future of prosperity is impossible without a thriving private sector in all of its forms, from the biggest corporate group to the smallest 1- and 2-person family enterprise. and I urge all members of this honorable House to support this budget. The people of Ghana will remember you with favor. Mr. Speaker, I thank you.